Good afternoon and welcome to the racing years. We've had 2011, 2012 and we move on to the year 2013. And over the next hour and a half, some special guests joining us on the line to dissect the year that was 2013. We've got Richard Hughes, we've got Ruby Walsh, Ryan Mania, George Baker, Sir Anthony McCoy, and they will all be joining Sam Turner and myself, who I will introduce shortly. It's an opportunity as well for you to get involved and pick out your memories, your favourite moments from the year 2013. You can do so studio@racingtv.com or at racingtv on Twitter. There is loads to get through, and it's time to introduce my co-host via the medium of live view. It's a very good afternoon to Sam Turner. Sam, testing times, but how are you coping?
Well, I don't think the dog's ever been fitter, Nick. The garden's probably as tidy as it's ever been. I'm certainly running out of things to do, that's for sure, but there's plenty of books I should be reading, and this has been a welcome distraction as well, sort of prepping and researching this, because obviously 7 years ago, for a man of 50, seems an awful long time ago. Certainly memory-wise, it isn't what it used to be. So yeah, it's been good to have a little trawl through the form books, have a good trawl through YouTube and see some of those classic old races, and perhaps one or two that you get redirected to along the way as well. So it's been good fun.
You do. We'll talk about the likes of Sprinter Sacre, his first win in the Queen Mother Champion Chase. He was imperious that year. Estimate's win at Royal Ascot. Trev's, of course, first arc I ought to mention as well. AP McCoy's 4,000 landmark. What stood out for you as the most defining memory of the year before we begin?
I think Estimate winning the Gold Cup was a massive moment. Obviously, to see those pictures of the Queen celebrating was just magnificent. I thought there was some scintillating performances. We had to wait till pretty much the year was done before we saw Trev win an arc. I mean, she was absolutely scintillating that day. Obviously, we had the sad passing of Sir Henry Cecil in June, and then obviously Lady Jane training two winners just 9 and 11 days afterwards seemed very fitting, although one obviously had a very sad postscript. There was the Alzaruni affair as well. Aurora's Encore winning at 66 to 1, as you referenced at the head of the show as well. Tony McCoy's 4,000 winners. So there was plenty going on, as is usually the way with this industry.
Super. Well, we'll get stuck in straight away and we'll go to the Cheltenham Festival and start with a question. Bit of trivia for you, Sam. And the first one, I think we've got it here, which is which race kicked off proceedings on day 2 of the Cheltenham Festival 2013? Do you know it?
I'd have to give that a bit of thought. I know that there was a bit of doubt surrounding day 1, wasn't there? I certainly remember that, because it was pretty cold. They had the sheets down and there was an inspection at 10:30. But yes, you might well have stumped me there.
Well, it's the National Hunt Chase. It was won by Back in Focus, trained by Willie Mullins, which leads us on to our first guest of the day. And it's a very good afternoon. For the second time this week, he joined me for 2011 and he's come back for more in 2013, the leading rider at the Cheltenham Festival of all time and in the year 2013. Good afternoon, Ruby Walsh. How do we find you?
Good, Nick, and yourself?
Not too bad at all. Interesting to hear what Sam said about the Cheltenham Festival that year, and I'm sure you'll remember as well as any others, the day before the temperatures were absolutely Baltic, and when you went into that Tuesday you'd have ridden out in the morning, and I think the course had to pass a 10:30 a.m. inspection. The times were moved back as well. They were extraordinarily cold temperatures as we pick up the shots now.
It was freezing, and I remember, I think the cross-country race was cancelled on the first day and moved to later in the week, if my memory serves me right. I think the first day the start was pushed back and there was only 6 races, I think. I wouldn't bet on it, but I think that's what happened. My memory, Sam might be saying he's excusing himself for being 50 and not having a great memory. Well, I'm only 40 and I can just about remember it. So I think that's what happened. I have different memories of 2013 too. Of course, Tuesday was a special day. I had a great day on Tuesday, but I don't think anybody will forget the Thursday, and for the wrong reasons, when poor John Thomas got the fall and was airlifted out at Cheltenham. So I think 2013 will always stick in my memory for that reason, unfortunately.
Yeah, mixed emotions indeed. We'll start with that first day where you had a fine fine start to proceedings, no more so than in that very first race, which was the Supreme Novices Hurdle. And the bumper winner of the previous year, Champagne Fever, led them all the way, which included my tent or yours as we pick it up here, and future champion hurdler Jeski as well. You dominated this day, and he became the first horse since the early 1990s to do the champion bumper Supreme Novice Hurdle double, Ruby.
Yeah, he wasn't the quickest horse in the world, Nick. He'd a very high cruising speed, and Patrick Mullins was always adamant that if you were pulling out him in any way, you were going too slow. So I just booked him out and let him roll. But going to the last, so my 10 to yours appeared on my outside and Jetski on my inside. You know, I wasn't certain I was going to win then, but when I jumped the last, and after going about 50 yards from the back of the last, I could find Champagne Fever getting back in front, and I kind of felt he was always going to hold my 10 to yours then. But it was a great performance from him. He had won in Leopardstown prior to that. He was a big price before the race. There was a good gamble on him, I remember, as well. People really got behind him, and he was a popular winner.
You've won the Supreme on all sorts of different horses. More recently, the likes of Vautour, Classical Dream, but you go back further to a horse like Noland, who stayed all the way to the line. What kind of a horse was Champagne Fever? Because he so nearly completed a festival treble the year later in the Arkle. What kind of a horse was he?
Still can't believe you got beaten in that Arkle, to tell you the truth. What kind of a horse was he? He was a big, tough horse. He was an honest enough horse. He always, to watch him or ride him, you would think he wanted further than 2 miles, yet a lot of his best performances were at 2 miles. He ran in a King George, didn't quite get home. He was by Stowaway. He definitely appreciated a bit better ground, but he just had a huge cruising speed. You could jump out and go really hard on him over 2 miles, and he would keep going, and I think that brought out the best in him.
We'll move on to the champion hurdle, because that was a huge performance from Hurricane Fly, who became the first horse to regain the champion hurdle crown since Comedy of Errors back in the 70s. I think he came off the bridle at the 5th, but he got back on it again and then showed that customary style. And I was just looking at his season 2012-2013, Ruby. The Morgiana, Grade 1 win at Leopardstown over Christmas. Cheltenham followed up at Punchestown as well. I think there was an Irish champion hurdle at Leopardstown in the January. I think he was just perfect at that stage, wasn't he?
He was, but I think a little bit like Altior, and maybe I shouldn't be comparing them, but as Hurricane Fly got a bit older, he got less flashy, where he was quite keen as a young horse and was all speed. As he got older, he got much more relaxed, and in a lot of his races in Leopardstown and in that champion hurdle, he looked to be in trouble at different points of the race, yet he seemed to kick into gear around the second last and off the bend, and all of a sudden he'd be in top flight when you needed him. It was almost like he had figured out where the winning post was, but he was, all his career, Nick, he was an incredible jumper, and jumping stood to him all through his career. And even on that occasion, that day, when he looked to be going as fast as he could all the way down the back, he threw some great jumps to keep him in the race, and then he ultimately outstayed him.
We've got some fantastic shots of you coming in a packed grandstand. Of course, doubt as to whether the racing would have gone ahead, but come mid-afternoon they'll have been glad it did, and Sam Turner, no doubt you'd have been there that day. The figures that Hurricane Fly stacked up were astounding, and actually when you just look back at his career, it's a real testament to what a brilliant racehorse he was over so many years, Sam.
Yeah, phenomenal strike rate. Obviously Ruby got on really well with him. I think the year after, I seem to remember he travelled a little bit sweeter than he did that year in winning. He was beaten by Jeski, unfortunately. I mean, Ruby will tell you perhaps the reasons behind that, but certainly that year, there's, as Ruby alluded to, there were a number of moments through the race where you just thought, is he going to come back on the bridle and switch on again? But he certainly did. I mean, he finished off very strongly, and the race was chock full of good quality horses again. So brilliant to see him recapture the crown 2 years after his initial victory.
What was his best ever performance on a racetrack, Ruby?
Oh, I don't know. I think when he went back to the Morgiana, that was 14, he won the Morgiana and beaten Jetski in 2014, and then he beat Our Connor and Jetski in Leopardstown in early 2015. I think for a horse getting on in years like he was, some of those performances later in his career were special, but there were some days he won in Ireland, Nick, in Leopardstown and in Punchestown. He never even came off the bridle to beat horses like Thousand Stars and Solwit and high-class horses. He was a brilliant horse, and he had great longevity, and I think jump horses need longevity to be considered to be great.
Well, that leads me on beautifully to the longevity that Quevega showed, because in 2013 she was on the cusp of 5 successive wins in the David Nicholson. She, of course, made it 6. But this year, I mean, just your quote afterwards, I think you said, I would have won very easily, but for what happened at the top of the hill. When your luck's in, because she did get hampered, but you wouldn't have known it how well she won at the finish.
No, she didn't. She clipped heels at the top of the hill, and I was lucky it didn't fall out over her ears, actually. But then I had to sit all the way down the hill, and the French horse, whose name escapes me now, kicked off the bend and was gone on me, and she really had to dig deep, but it gave her something to aim at. And, you know, in fairness to Queviga, she was a brilliant little filly, and she, when I wanted her down to the last, she absolutely pinged it. And to be fair to her, when she got to the French horse, she ultimately won quite well. But, you know, that was number 5, number 6 was coming the year after. She was an amazing little filly, and you need to have a little bit of luck, but you know, she didn't have luck that day, yet she still managed to get herself out of it and win. That just showed the ability that she had.
She used to win with real style and swagger in the early days, but would you know instinctively, because you didn't ride her on the racecourse that much obviously each year, she was saved for a couple of days each year and she delivered in spades, but would you know instinctively early doors what kind of a feel she'd be giving you? Because obviously there were such different manners in the way that she won her races at Cheltenham.
No, but you'd always be delighted when you'd get through the tape and the race would start, because she'd often get to the start and dig her feet in and wouldn't want to walk around with the others, and I was always afraid in my life that she would plant herself at the start someday. So I was always happy once the race had started and I was in it, and she'd come alive herself then after going a half a mile or whatever it would be. But the starts were often tricky on her. She was a bit jadey maybe.
Well, she was certainly not jadey at the end of the races. The new one, of course, won the Neptune early doors on the Wednesday. And just before we sort of talk about the race and your ride on Pont Alexandre, who I think you said was never really travelling, to pay tribute to the horse, he was exactly what you'd want as a national hunt sort of superstar, because we kept seeing him year after year after year. He won 20 of his 40 races, and indeed I think he ran at 7 consecutive renewals of the Cheltenham Festival.
But that's why the new one became so popular. It was because of his longevity and his ability to keep turning up. He won a couple of international hurdles. He was very good this day, and when he won the was it Ballymore then? I'm sure it was. He then went Daintree and took on the older horses, but the new one, because he was a stand-in dish and he was unlucky in a champion hurdle one year and ran some really good races in other champion hurdles, but he was a very good winner of this novice hurdle. He travelled super for Sam Twiston-Davis, quickened up really well and sprinted away to win, and you were thinking, God, there's a real live champion hurdle horse for 2014. But he maybe didn't have the luck in champion hurdles, but he was a cracking little horse, and you'd have to admire his longevity and how often he turned up, and he always gave a good account of himself.
And with you and on Pont Alexandre on the day, I mean, he was a decent third. I think the Grand National winner of a few years later was second, Rule the World. But Pont Alexandre on the day, was he just put in his place by the new one?
I think he was, but I'm not sure he ran again after that, Nick, for quite a time. I think he may have picked up an injury that day. Or did he run in Punchestown? I can't remember. I'll tell you how bad my memory is, but I know he didn't run the following season. So, he didn't. He leaned a bit to his right, I think, on that occasion, and it didn't happen for him. But I don't have that clear a memory of it. I can remember the ones I won on, but the ones I got beaten on, I tend to forget them ones.
We've got another winner to come, don't you worry about that. Just to reflect on the career of the new one, that was one of his finest days, Sam, at the Cheltenham Festival of 2013, a Grade 1 victory. I mean, he ran at Cheltenham so many times, and he was just reliable, and we'd see him turn out year after year, wouldn't we?
Yeah, he was probably just below top class. I mean, Nigel Twiston-Davis won't thank me for saying that, but there's no disgrace in that. I mean, he was just tremendously consistent and a winning machine at just below top class. I mean, he had some good days in Grade 1s as well, don't forget those. But, you know, that race, you look back, you see Rule the World in second, Takin Desoy further down the field as well. It wasn't a bad renewal, was it? And, you know, he was a terrific horse, and of course he loved Cheltenham. I think he ran there sort of 7 or 8 times, I think, and you know the crowd there had a real affinity with him, and you know he did have a little bit of a fan club, and quite understandably so, because when he was presented with a good opportunity, when he was made favourite, I think there were some incredible stats that he won on such a high percentage of those performances that he was always going to be very popular with the punters.
We saw an absolute superstar that day. It was the first of 2 wins in the Queen Mother Champion Chase for Sprinter Sacre. I think it was the shortest price horse at the Cheltenham Festival, certainly in the championship race for many, many decades, going back to the days of Arkle when he was 1-4 favourite. And just, Sam, with this horse on that day, Would anything in the 2 mile divisions of certainly recent times have been able to live with him?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think he was at this point in his career, before the 1 or 2 issues started to manifest a little bit later on in his career, he was just exemplary, wasn't he? He had the scope to go big, to jump well. He fiddled. His cruising speed was sort of unparalleled, really. And I mean, look, I haven't ridden top quality horses, but you look at Barry Geraghty's body language through these races, and it was just simply a case of, come on, son, just get to A to B, because we know we're going to trounce these lot. And, you know, they're good horses in behind. Sizing Europe is beaten 19, 20 wickets here, and Sprinter Sacre isn't coming off the bridle. I think the handicappers would suggest this performance and then the Aintree performance were his two of his best through his career. And when he was right, he was some horse, wasn't he? And, you know, he was the type of horse. I know plenty of horses do move Nicky Henderson to tears, but this lad certainly did. And, you know, he was always sent off very short prices, unfortunately, so he wasn't really a punting vehicle as such. But, you know, you swept that aside really by just watching the majesty of his performances most of the time.
And came back 3 years later, that emotional victory to win it again. Just, Ruby, to have ridden against him, I mean, you rode some superstar 2 mile chasers, the likes of Mastermind, Corto Star as a 2 miler, Azerty up a few years prior. Just what is it about those 2 mile chasers that can stagger and wow us as much as they do?
Well, maybe not with Sprinter Sacre. He was just probably a little bit different than the rest of them. But a lot of them, they tend to come along in groups, Nick. So there's great competition and great races. You obviously had Moscow Flyer, Azerty up and well, Chief. You know, you just can get good batches of them together. And Sprinter Sacre was an incredible horse. And that day he was amazing. He was even better, I think, when he beat Q Card and Fleming Star and Aintree that season. But he was just a phenomenal horse. And even in his Arkle, when he beat Alpha off and Q Card, he had them, 2 of them beaten so far from home. He was just the power he had, the pace he had, and the scope he had. He was an incredible racehorse. Now, I'd love to have had a go at him on the Masterminded as a 5-year-old. I think he was an incredible horse. I think that would have been some race, but I still don't think it's fair to compare horses of different generations. In his generation, Sprinter Sacre was head and shoulders above the opposition.
Yeah, here. Now, also on that day, you talked about not talking about the ones where you got beaten on. You weren't beaten in the Champion Bumper. It was quite a price. A once raced under rules prior, owned by Graham Wiley, trained by Willie Mullins, ridden by Ruby Walsh. It was Briar Hill. He goes off a 25 to 1 shot. I think he'd won not necessarily much of a race at Thurles back in January, a 7-length winner. And you said afterwards you weren't counting on this fella to give you a winner. He surprised you. Did that just about sum it up?
Oh, big time. I was heading down the back straight in my head, making up my excuses for Willie Mullins and Graham Wiley as to why I'd gotten so far back and how I wasn't anywhere close to where I had told him I was going to be or what I was going to try and do. But he came alive at the top of the hill, travelled really well down it, and he just picked up and flew up the straight. Now, he was obviously, and always was, a much better racehorse than he was workhorse. But I think we look back to that bumper. The second is Regal Encore, who ended up a real stayer over fences, and you know, on the day Briar Hill was just very good. I mean, I think 25 to 1 probably surmises how much he was showing us all at home and how unflashy he was. And obviously he went back the following year and fell in the Albert Bartlett, but he was a good horse who just didn't have much luck. He got a bad kick that day in the Albert Bartlett and actually broke his cheek or his jaw, and I don't think he ever fully recovered from it, really.
Now, you quite rightly touched on how the landscape of the Cheltenham Festival, certainly the meeting, changed on the Thursday, and that was after the fall of JT McNamara on Galaxy Rock. And I was just watching in the office earlier when we re-ran the 2012 Cheltenham Festival, his ride on T for 3 in the National Hunt Chase. He was a superb rider, wasn't he?
He was a brilliant rider, and I think Rit Dove, T for 3, the list goes on. I mean, his association with Risk of Thunder, with Spot the Difference, you know, even as a young horse, the Good Hunter Chase horse that Nina ended up riding after that. He was, you know, JT was a brilliant rider, a real horseman. I knew him all my life. We started as amateurs. He was a little bit older than me. We rode quite a bit together, and I knew him through my association with working with Enda Bulger. But he was a terrific horseman, and he had his own way about him. He was realistic. There was no airs and graces, but he was a genuine person, and one that will always be sadly missed. And I think that day in Cheltenham in 2013 will forever be etched in the memories of anybody that was in the wearing.
Hear, hear. The thoughts on the late JT McNamara of course, from Ruby Walsh there. Now, as we move on to the Friday, I'll just stick with you for a second, Ruby, because you were on the second here. But you mentioned this horse already. This was the jaw-dropping display of Al Connor in the Triumph Hurdle of 2013 for the late Desi Hughes. We'll hear from his son Richard Hughes a little bit later on. I suppose the mind goes back just a few weeks ago to what Goshen would have likely done at the Cheltenham Festival in the Triumph Hurdle. But just how impressive was this a performance?
It was, and he had been shown it pretty much all winter in Ireland. And I think our Connor and this year signalled the arrival of Brian Cooper as well. He won the JLT on Beneficent. Our Connor, I think he won the County Hurdle maybe on Ted Veal, but our Connor he was in a different league, as you say, Goshen, Nick. That's what it reminds you of. Obviously he didn't have much luck the following season, our Connor, but this was a hell of a performance. And to be fair to the late Desi Hughes, he didn't hide the regard that he held him in. He always maintained he was a brilliant horse, and he may well could have been a superstar, but unfortunately things went against him. But on this occasion, he routed some decent horses in the Triumph, and a lot of races can change from the home turn in Cheltenham on the new course, but this was one race that was completely over before they turned in. He was going that easy.
He was exceptional. Just seeing the fantastic slow motion footage of the horse jumping in what was pretty much splendid isolation by the time he got to the last, and he went away to win, and of course so sadly lost his life next year in the Champion Hurdle. And there is a young Brian Cooper who went on to win the Gold Cup at Cheltenham a few years later on Doncaster. Just quickly, Sam, we mentioned Goshen and that performance which would have been in the Triumph Hurdle a few weeks ago, and the mind would go back to Al Connor, as Ruby said.
Yeah, very much so. I'd actually written in the notes it was a very Goshen-like performance, totally dominant. The way that he travelled through the race as well. One of probably the most upsetting days on a racecourse when he lost his life in that Champion Hurdle fall, because he just looked such an exceptional talent, and seen him win the Spring Juvenile, which was obviously a brilliant stepping stone for this race, and he won that pulling a cart really, and his dominance in this race was just totally emphatic. It was a tremendous performance. He was such a bonny little horse as well, just a great attitude, loved jumping hurdles, and it was an absolute choker to lose him so early. Yeah,
and a superstar trainer, Desi Hughes, who knew what it was like to ride and train top level horses at the Cheltenham Festival over the decades. We'll just move on to the Gold Cup of that year. And Ruby, sorry to throw this one at you with Silviniaco Conti, but just watching it back, 3 out, he comes down, he's travelling well, but I suppose if he was to have a big chance at the end of the race, he would be travelling well 3 out. It was a bit of a gruelling test on the day, wasn't it?
It was pretty end-to-end, long run, and Sir de Champ are in front here. Silviniaco Conti in the pink, I don't know, got in a bit close and dribbled out at the back of it. Bobsworth is just behind them, but I didn't actually, to be honest, Nick, that day didn't think I was going as well as most people did, and I think he came down the hill travelling equally as well the following year, having won the King George with Noel Feely. And if you said turning in 2014 that Silviniaco Conti wouldn't finish in the first 4, somebody would have taken their temperature. I don't think he quite got the Gold Cup trip, so that was one fall that never quite haunted me. But here you'd say Sir de Champ was going to win, but in fairness, Bobsworth, Barry Garrity came from a little bit off the pace, and he really outstayed them. The Giant Boaster gets a great run through on the inside, but Bobsworth, he had bags of stamina. He'd won the Hennessy, he'd won an Albert Bartlett. Barry had tremendous faith in him, he really fancied him, and he delivered this day for Nicky Henderson.
He gave everything, didn't he, Sam? Just seeing the closing stage of the Sir de Champ in second, the previous winner of the race from a couple of years ago, Long Run in third. But as Ruby quite rightly touched on, the stamina was there. As a young horse, he won the Albert Bartlett, he won the RSA, and then he completed another win at the Cheltenham Festival in the biggest race of them all.
Absolutely, I think that was his 4th Cheltenham victory, his 3rd at festivals, as you say, Albert Bartlett, RSA, Gold Cup, and he got some kick at the end of a race as well, hadn't he, Bobsworth? And to go there just off the back of that one performance in the Hennessy as well, really great training performance. And you wouldn't have said, would you, halfway up the running, that he was going to go away and win by 7. Sir de Champ looked as though he was closing on and was going to make it tight at the line, and then he's just extended away, and the runner-up has faded a little bit. He's broken his heart, hasn't he, Bobsworth? And the thing I loved about Bobsworth was just his head carriage. He was just head down, grinding away, and he loved that Cheltenham Hill, whereas others found it a little bit of a step beyond them. He absolutely adored it and came up it a number of times to win.
And Sam, just quickly sticking with you, you said it might be a little bit tricky to recall a few of the years, but certainly you remember if it's a good punting year. Was 2013 that or not?
Well, that day certainly very fortuitously worked out okay, because I did fancy O'Connor, and I also fancied Salsify and the Fox Hunters, which needed the biggest slice of luck that you've ever required on a racecourse to actually back a winner as well, because obviously Oscar Delta jinked at the false rail or the tape, and sadly unshipped our colleague Jane Mangan, who would have booted Oscar Delta to a very comfortable victory in the end, and Salsify was the chief beneficiary. So yes, the day didn't finish too badly.
Excellent stuff. We'll be hearing from Ruby when we reminisce over the rest of some of the jumping highlights from 2013. We will be omitting for the time being the exploits of Sir Anthony McCoy, because we'll be hearing from him in that record-breaking year a little bit later on. But we're going to be talking about the Grand National in a moment or two's time. So Sam, I'm going to fire another question at you. How many of the 40 runners successfully made it to the Canal Turn in 2013, the year that Aurora's Encore won the Grand National?
All of them, Nick.
Let's have a look. How many
All
was it?
40?
All 40. There you are. That's the quiz. You've done that. There's a couple more coming your way as well. So we'll see how you get on. But I'm delighted to say that the winning jockey from the Grand National 2013 is on the line. Ryan Manier, thank you very much indeed for coming on the line to speak to us. Difficult time internationally, certainly in Britain, and of course in the world of racing at the moment. How are you coping, Ryan?
Like everybody, just trying to keep fit and try not to think about racing too much. Now that jump racing has been put back to July, it's quite a long holiday that we have, which isn't ideal. But as you say, there's a lot going on in the world that are a lot worse.
Yeah, indeed, and that news coming out yesterday regarding jumps racing. But if I say the name Aurora's Encore to you, what sort of memory does that evoke now?
It's always very quite emotional, actually. I was down at Sue Smith's just a few weeks ago, and I saw him standing in his stable, and it always just brings back such amazing memories. Even the memories I have of the Grand National, it just feels like a bit of a blur, like it actually didn't happen. Like it's somebody else that I'm watching, because it's just so surreal. I never thought that anything like that would ever happen to me.
We're picking it up in the concluding stages. I think T3's just in front of you at this point, but he goes out 66 to 1 shot. The year before he'd run a very good staying performance when placed in the Scottish National. But what could you possibly have expected on the day?
We genuinely didn't expect anything. Harvey Smith told me beforehand that he would win, but he always did that. He was always positive, but I had a good plan in my head. It was actually to follow Ruby, because he knew his way around there, and it went to plan from the start. And I just didn't want to worry about riding too much of a race until I'd got to Beecher's Brook second time, and we went from there. And he was always travelling, always jumping, and made my job very easy.
Interesting. I saw what you'd said afterwards, and you said very rarely does the race work out to plan, and particularly not one like the Grand National. He said, but crossing the Meling Road, I thought I'd be in the first 3 or 4. I just couldn't believe the way in which the front two stopped in front of me, and you've hit the lead by the time we picked this up, and you weren't for stopping.
No, for stopping. As I say, the Meling Road, I thought I'd be placed, and he's absolutely winged the last, and the horses that were beside him have sort of stopped, and he's completely outstayed them. We knew that he'd stayed, and Sue and Harvey are very good at training stairs, and he's galloped all the way to the line. And there was the loose horse on my inside, who I didn't know was a loose horse. So I just always felt like this can't be happening. Surely someone's going to pass me, and luckily nobody ever did.
We're going to see the walk back. You've just crossed the line aboard Aurora's Encore, pulling up at the end. What's that moment like, to go back, to come and cross the line as you did in front, and then to make your way back into the winner's enclosure as the winner of the Grand National? You've just taken your goggles off, and obviously delight all round. But is it hazy, or does it go by in a blur, or were you able to drink it in?
Yeah, it's a complete blur. You're waiting to be woken up from your dream. It really is. It's nothing that you can really explain. Everyone always asks me what is it like, and there's no way of explaining it. It's something that is just the most incredible feeling in the world, and as I say, you just can't even take it all in. I can't, if you're watching this back, I can't even remember that. It's just all gone by in a blur, an absolute blur.
So Harvey Smith said to you, of course he said he'd win, so when you went back, what was the first thing he said to you? Did he say, "I told you so"?
I don't think he said anything. I think he just gave me a big hug and didn't say anything. Even Harvey Smith was lost for words. Does
it change your life, Ryan?
It did. It did in the short term, certainly. Suddenly, everybody sort of knows who you are, and you become quite popular. I think I actually became more popular for having a really bad fall the day after. That suddenly sparked a lot more interest in me, certainly. But it just changed my life completely, and you're forever then known as a Grand National winning jockey.
You really are, aren't you? Obviously, was it the next November? This is April 2013. The next November, you retired at the age of 25. Struggles with the weight. You said was it altogether just, in your words, a bit of a painful experience, just battling the weight, even a year and a half after winning the Grand National?
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, things in my personal life maybe weren't great either, and it affected my weight and my riding. And when you're in that headspace, I couldn't see any other way out. I sort of, maybe my biggest regret is not actually asking somebody for help. I was trying to sort of deal with it all internally, and it really didn't work. And as I say, retiring was the only option that I saw at the time. Which obviously I regret now, but I never like to look back and regret too much, because sort of everything happens for a reason, and I've managed to come back now, and I feel sort of stronger, fitter, and fitter than ever, really.
That's the thing. You came back in late October, just gone, so a few years after the game. Just to anyone listening, I think you said it was more of an understanding of nutrition, how to stay physically fit, manage your weight. Did things just fall into place enough for you to want to come back then?
Yeah, I looked for some help and got in with a sports nutritionist, and he completely changed my relationship with food and exercise, and it's really just a complete part of my life now. I don't have to think about it too much, and it's just changed my complete outlook, and your headspace is great. Before I was doing a lot of sweating and things like that, and now I don't really have to do any, and it's just changed my life, and it's really good, and it's sort of back and loving riding horses again.
Fantastic, Ryan. Thank you very much for sharing your memories of Aurora's Encore when you rode him to win the Grand National of 2013. Hopefully we'll have a quick enough resumption of racing in the next few months, and good to have you back. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Really interesting having the thoughts of Ryan Manier on his winning ride aboard Aurora's Encore in the Grand National. And Ruby, just you'd have been listening in there, a man who knows what it takes to win the National, Papillon and Hedge Hunter. He was following you. It was quite interesting to hear his summary of how the race went for him.
I'm glad he got out from behind me at Beechers the second time, because on his own fella Valentine's. I'm glad he didn't follow me up to that one. But it's interesting just to listen to him there, Nick. I mean, you hear him talking about life and trying to deal with the struggles he had and dealing with them on his own. And I'm sure there's lots of people at the moment confined to houses and spaces that are struggling, and pick up the phone and ring someone. It's always good to talk. You're not on your own, anybody that's watching.
Yeah, quite right as well. And Sam, just on that day, it was a very big priced winner of the race, 66-1. But the story of Ryan Manier, as he quite rightly said, for anyone in the press, once you're a Grand National winner, be it trainer, owner, obviously the horse, but the jockey as well, that's it. That's etched in the history books, isn't it?
Yeah, and as he very modestly said, I think he was almost airlifted, I think, from Hexham the next day. Had a really bad fall, which was, incredible really, that he'd been riding in the National the day before and winning that, and it should have been a bit about basking in that glory really. But I think that was really much the story of a modern day National, wasn't it? As we touched on with the question, there was still an awful lot of horses. I think after 12 fences there was only 5 casualties. No horses were sort of injured or jockeys injured through that race either, which was great news. It was a very clean National in some respects, and the ground had dried out pretty significantly, as we saw from the pictures. I think they did 9:12 for the time, so it was a pretty warm day, and the ground certainly suited Aurora's Encore. I think Connections were on record as saying they needed it to dry out, and it certainly did, and the stars aligned for Ryan Manier and the Connections.
We'll talk about a couple of the other highlights from that year and stick with Aintree in a couple of the Grade 1 races and go straight into Zarkanda's performance winning the Aintree Hurdle over 2.5 miles. We watched the new one winning the Neptune. He went on to this race, but Ruby, you weren't letting him have another Grade 1 victory this day, were you?
No. I think I getting a pretty bad fall out Zarkanda in that race the year before, so it was nice to get a bit of redemption on him, but Zarkanda was incredibly tough this day. Battled really gamely from the last to hold off the new one, or get back up actually to beat the new one. Sam Twiston Davis headed me on the run in. 1,000 Stars was third, Oscar Whiskey was fourth, but I think it was typical Paul Nicholls. Blinkers on, aimed the horse at a race and got a big day out of him. Absolutely right. Also winner of a Triumph Hurdle and stayed around for quite some time. Now, I'll just stick with you, Ruby, because we're going to go back to Sprinter Sacre. That was the performance in the Meling Chase after he'd won the Queen Mother Champion Chase. And you can see their cue cards there, and a bit further back, the likes of Fleming Star, Finian's Rainbow. But you think it's not a performance we'd always go back to watch, given the Cheltenham wins, but this was a performance of the highest order, wasn't it? It was, and before we picked it up, Fleming Star had tried to keep Sprinter Sacre in, turning in, and Barry Geraghty just pushed him out of the way like Fleming Star wasn't there, and Q Card had obviously won the Ryanair, but look, I mean, Barry Geraghty never moved a muscle. This was an incredible performance, up to 2.5 miles, and he went from there to Punchestown and won in Punchestown 2.5 or 3 weeks after this. He was, and that season, people say, pick out different years when Cawdo Star did this, that or the other, but Cawdo's first year in 06-07 was a phenomenal year, and Sprinter Sacre on this year had an incredible season as well, and he was unbeatable that year, and he went from one race to the next, and that was Sprinter Sacre, I think, in his absolute prime. I'd agree with that, and beautifully trained by Nicky Henderson. We've seen looking quite emotional after the performance of Sprinter Sacre in the Meling Chase, beating one of his other horses in there as well, Finian's Rainbow, who'd won the race before. We also saw Q Card in that race, and if we wind the clocks forward to November of that year and the Betfair Chase over 3 miles, Sam, I'll bring you in. You can see the horses in the shot there, Dinas, the Grey, Silviniaco Conti, and Q Card and Silviniaco Conti. It was their race, the Betfair Chase, for a few years between them, wasn't it?
It was, and I mean, Q Card at this day certainly answered a fair few stamina questions, and he was pretty aggressively ridden as well. Nobody felt that 3 mile 1 round Haydock in deep ground was going to be really his bag, to be honest. But Joe Tizard made plenty of use of him, and he just turned them away in the straight for the first of sort of 3 Betfair Chase victories. He was almost as synonymous with Haydock as Bristol de Mai in a lot of respects, and it just puts into perspective really what Sprinter Sacre did to him at Aintree. I mean, he'd won a Ryanair Q Card by 9 lengths, went to Aintree with high hopes of lowering the colours of Sprinter Sacre, and was just readily dismissed. Then he came out, he ran poorly in a Halden Gold Cup, but there were excuses there. It was 2 miles. I think Joe lost an iron at some stage as well. He made a little bit of an error or slipped, but then he went to Haydock and destroyed him. It was a really dominant performance, and one which suggested he was very much back on the big stage. Very much so. And later that season, Silviniaco Conti got his revenge on Q Card in the King George on Boxing Day, the first of a couple of wins in the race for the horse. Ruby, you know what it takes to win a King George. Silviniaco Conti, the body language of Noel Feely, slightly different to that of Joe Tizard on Q Card. But again, these are horses. Q Card, he won the bumper in 2010, and he was still running at the Cheltenham Festival in 2018. These were long-standing, enduring, high-quality horses, weren't they? Oh, they were, and as Sam has said there about, it just shows you what kind of horse Sprinter Sacre was. The same came of Hurricane Fly, when in this year in 2013 Solbert stepped up and bolted in the Stayers hurdle, and he couldn't land a glove on Hurricane Fly all of his career. So it just shows you what calibre of horse Sprinter Sacre and Hurricane Fly were, and Silviniaco Conti got his day here in the King George. I mean, it looked turning in like Q Card was home and hose, but for some reason, and you can't say he didn't stay, but for some reason he just seemed to cut out that day. Q Card and Sprinter Sacre or Silviniaco Conti wore him down to win, and Kempton really suited Silviniaco Conti, and they won a couple of King Georges. They did. At this era we saw Joe Tizard riding, you were riding, of course, Noel Feely, who's now retired, and so too was Sir Anthony McCoy, who that year notched up his 4,000th victory. Ruby, you're his great friend, his great rival on the track as well over many, many years. Just before we speak to him, because I think he's kindly on the line, how staggering was that achievement when he notched that up in November of 2013?
It's phenomenal riding, and we've spoken about horses having longevity and being able to continue and enhance their careers. When you look at someone like AP, I mean, to be champion jockey 20 years in a row, I mean, somebody might come along in time and ride more winners than him, but nobody will ever repeat that. To be able to deal with whatever injuries he picked up along the way and still be champion jockey 20 times, one after the other, and ride over 4,000 winners. Mind the riding, even if he's riding at 20% strike rate, that's 20,000 rides. But you imagine the travelling, the mileage, the falls, the hours worked. I think it's incredible when you start adding up the numbers around what it would take to ride 4,000 winners. It's a phenomenal work rate.
That leads us in beautifully to Sir Anthony McCoy, who's kindly on the line. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time out. How are things, AP?
Good, Nick. Not too bad. Thanks.
Good, man. I don't know if you were listening there to whether you could hear what Ruby just, summary of your career and the longevity, but also the things you had to face in that time. The statistics notched up as well. I don't know if you heard that.
I did. Is he with you or is he on the phone?
He's on the phone.
Oh, that's good. I didn't think he'd be working too hard.
Hey.
I look, Nick, a lot of things have to go right for you to be able to do that. I was very lucky that I worked for a lot of very successful people all throughout my career, from when I was a kid at Brady Rocks to Jim Bulgers to Toby Baldings. You know, went to Martin Pipes, which was just a winning factory. You know, and then to finish off with John Joe and JP. I genuinely lived the dream, and all about the mileage and the travel and all that. I'm driving a JCB at the moment. I actually think I'm working today, whereas for the 25 years before that, I'd never done a day's work in my life. So, I like Ruby, like any of those lads. I live the dream, I say, and I think when you work for and with successful people, it definitely, it makes you better. It makes you want to achieve, and it makes you want to try and improve yourself all the time. So, I do think I do think all records always get broken at some point, because in my last year riding, I wrote my fastest 100th winner, and I'm thinking, I think it was the 21st of August, I'm thinking, at 20 years I couldn't do that. So if I could do it when I was 40, then someone else would be able to do it, So that's the reality of things like that. But it's a nice thing to do. When I rode my 4,000 winner, it sort of, it kind of worked out nicely, because, a lot of Toaster was a pretty local race course, and I know that Eve and Archie, my kids and family, were able to be there, and obviously JP and John McManus were there. John Joe was obviously there. Toby Balding, I think might have been still there at the time. I think I have a picture of Toby outside it, before he passed away. So there was a lot of good, and the fact it was in Toaster, it was close. I think the next day I was in Suddle or something. No disrespect to Suddle, but I don't think, it wasn't quite as close to home or as London or anywhere else. I'm not sure I would have had the same amount of people come to watch. So, but yeah, you need a lot of luck, and and then I had, I'd obviously Dave Roberts, who was more into winning than I was. He was like, he was more obsessed than me. So, and that's, when you have someone like that working for you all the time and trying to get you on the best horses and give you the best chances all the time, then, I feel like if I wasn't going to do it, I'd be letting him down. So. But no, in terms of that, you got to live the dream.
Absolutely right. Just sticking on that ever so slightly, you mentioned the fact that it could have been Southwell. I think earlier that week you were at Exeter, and there was this media frenzy building up. Everyone wanted to be there. I think it was Holden Gold Cup day, and there were plenty of people on hand in case it was broken that day. Did you get caught up in the moment with the eventual when's it going to happen? When am I going to land that 4,000?
It's a little different. There's not. Not in a disrespectful way, but there's not as much pressure on it, if you like. I remember when I was trying to beat on Richard's record in 2002, and I got to, I got to a stage where I was getting close, and all you're thinking about is, and I never really thought about it in my life, but I was thinking about, don't get injured, because that's the only thing that can, so there's a little bit, the 4,000 hopefully was going to come along at some point or another, but when I was trying to beat on Richard's record, I couldn't afford to get injured. I couldn't afford to have suspensions. I couldn't, because it was a season. There was time was against me, So, but no, the way it worked out at Toaster, it couldn't have worked out better, So it could.
Just this year, obviously we are without racing at the moment, but April would be the 5-year anniversary of when you retired on that brilliant sunny day at the end of the season back in 2015. How quickly have the last 5 years gone, AP? Can you believe it's gone like it has?
No, it hasn't. I can't believe how quick it's gone. Well, it might have gone quick for all you, but there's times when I don't think it's gone that quick. No, it has. It has gone quick. I didn't. It's hard to believe it's been 5 years. I don't. I don't look back and have any regrets about that. I know that it was the right thing. I knew that was when I retired in 2015. All being well, if I was going to be champion jockey, I was always going to retire. And I know people say if you're thinking about retiring, you should retire. I was always very structured in my life and always planned things. I always liked to know what I was doing, and I've said it many times. I set myself that goal when I won 15 jockey championships. If I could win 5 more, that the time should be right to, that the time would be to walk away after winning 20 jockey championships, no matter how well I'm doing, and nothing was ever going to change that. Much and hard and all as it was, and maybe if I hadn't have won 20 consecutive jockey championships, maybe I might have kept going. But it's hard. Ruby will tell you, as a jump jockey, when you get to 40 and plus, and it's hard. And I didn't want to ever think that. I just never want to think that I said at the time I was worried that people might think I wasn't as good as I once was. I didn't want to come back home and watch racing and think, oh my God, you're gone. Do you know what I mean? I didn't want to. I never wanted that to happen. So maybe there was a lot of people thinking that I should have retired sooner, but I dragged it out for that length of time, and I think I did well too.
I don't think there'd be that many. Just lastly, while we have is because you just said you were always forward-thinking, planning. That was the racing life that served you so well for a couple of decades or so. Now that you're not racing, riding, and obviously we've got this period of lockdown, do you get nostalgic? Do you reflect, or are you always looking forward?
No, not really. I don't. I'm. I must admit I have. I had a. I know that. Sue McMahon has texted me. She's in Barbados at the moment. She said that Synchronised Gold Cup was on the other night, and I actually did have to. I didn't realise the replays were on RTV, and I ended up watching it again the other night. And it's nice to watch things like that, So it is. But if it hadn't been on TV, I don't know that I'd have got a DVD and started watching it again. I'm not that bad. I'm not that bad. I don't think. But you kind of. I think at this time, obviously there's more important things in the world, but it makes you appreciate, what a great life being involved in racing is.
Hear to that. Sir AP, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. Really interesting to you talking about 2013 and then the years that have been since your riding career. Keep safe, well, keep busy, and hopefully we'll speak soon. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Ruby, just to hear from AP there, who sounded on great form. Just really interesting to hear his thoughts on what it was like to break that record, but also what he's done in the 5 years since he's retired. Of course, we're not a million miles off a year since you were out of the saddle as well.
No, but I bet you he walked outside into the wind so people would think he was actually doing something. There's no doubt he was sitting on the couch watching television, saying he was driving a digger. He was, right? Yeah, right, he was. Time does fly, but as AP said there, it does get harder when you get older, and falls hurt. Don't hurt anymore, but the recovery from them takes longer, and your body is your body, and no matter how much things have improved over time regards physios and rehab and diet, it doesn't get easier as you get older, and time catches up with everybody. And like he said, he got to an age where he thought he'd had enough, and I was the same. It starts to become a drag on your body, and then it becomes very difficult.
Sam, we've obviously had the luxury of hearing from Ruby, obviously for the majority of the show so far, hearing from AP there as well, and two of the jockeys who were the landscape largely of the National Hunt era we're talking about. Obviously for AP it was coming towards the end of his career, but still absolute dominant forces back in 2013.
Yeah, and I think the joy with both of them is that they went out on the top, and they went out with people asking, are you sure you should be retiring, rather than when are you going to retire? And I thought that 4,000th winner of AP's at Toaster was a microcosm really of his career. It was a horse that, probably 2 out had little chance of winning, and somehow he galvanised another run out of it, looked after it. He did anything but beat it up. He certainly just nursed and cajoled it through sheer strength. He was like a force of nature really in the saddle, as much as Ruby was really. And those rides on the likes of Wichita Lineman and Refinement and Hennessy perhaps, and Synchronised, even the horse that he touched on there winning the Gold Cup, they were all races that were sort of saved or managed to be captured from positions which looked absolutely pointless at some stage. So that for me is the genuine quality in a rider, really pinching races that he or she has no right to pinch, and it's all very well winning on the ones that are the steering jobs, but nicking those races which you don't look as though you've got any chance of doing, and that was AP really, and Ruby in a nutshell.
Here, here. Sam, you're sticking with me as we switch to the flat after a little bit of a break, but what we'll do is say goodbye to Ruby as we've concentrated on the jumps for the first part of the show, 2013, the look back. You were with me for 2011 as well a couple of days ago. Fancy doing another year or two down the line as well?
Nick, seeing as like everybody else, I'm flat out here, mowing gas and whatever else. Why not?
Top man, Ruby, thank you very much indeed. Reflections on the jump season, the jumps year of 2013, and so much was packed in. Thank you to Ruby Walsh, and when you rejoin us, we'll be switching to the flat.
The Emerald Isle. Racing is so much more. These guys are braver than me. A mid-weekend in the Wild West. The race that stops the nation. Head to racingbreak.com to find out more.
Here is a Racing TV Travel Club offer in partnership with Racing Breaks, and it's for the Cheltenham Festival in 2021. It's to book an overnight package for the 2021 festival for just a £25 deposit and get £25 off your first booking with code RTV25. And to find out a bit more, visit racingtv.com/travel club.
At Racing TV, 100% of our profits go back into racing. Thank you for supporting the sport that we all know and love.
Welcome back to the Racing Years, this year being 2013. Extensively looked at the jump season, and now we are switching to the level, the summer of 2013. Sam Turner is still with me, but I'm delighted to welcome Racing TV pundit, classic winning jockey, Group 1 winning jockey that year as well, George Baker, who's live at home. And I think that year, 2013, George, was the second time you crossed a century of winners, not the last. The Group 1 came on Champions Day as well. I imagine a year you reflect quite fondly on.
Yeah, it was a fantastic year for myself. Breakthrough and getting my first Group 1, which is every jockey's dream. It took me a long time to get there, and it was a very proud moment in my career.
How's the home studio going? I think we had a little bit of break-up there, but successful transition to obviously what is a testing enough time and sticking at home for the time being and for the foreseeable future. Are you coping okay?
Yeah, it's all good this end. Obviously it's a bit of a culture shock, but everyone's going through the same situation at the moment, and you just got to be very sensible.
Sam, we talked about a couple of the key highlights, which would have been the flat of 2013 and that legendary day when Estimate won the Gold Cup, Trev's Arc, of course. There was plenty to talk about. But as you quite rightly mentioned as well at the start of the show, there was a hugely significant point midway through the year. That was in June when Sir Henry Cecil, the 10-time British champion flat trainer, passed away. 25 classics under his belt. The trainer of some of the greatest horses many of us will have ever seen. And it was truly a massive moment in the sport of horse racing.
Yeah, it was very emotional, Nick. I think, obviously a lot of people had seen the deterioration in Henry's health over 1 or 2 years. Obviously, his brilliant ability with Frankel was really a fitting epitaph, really, and bookmarked a fantastic career, which, as you say, stretched back 10 Traitors titles, 4 derbies, 4 St Ledgers, 9 1,000 and 2,000 guineas. I mean, there wasn't a big race that he hadn't won. And it was very emotional seeing him after the Juddmonte International, which Frankel had obviously destroyed his field, a really good top quality field as well. So we certainly did lose a superstar and a legendary figure from the game that year. And obviously there was some very emotional scenes at Ascot just a number of days later when Morpheus has obviously won for Lady Cecil, that Nottingham maiden, in the interim, but then on to Ascot where Riposte and Thomas Chippendale gave Lady Cecil a double, and they were really welcome, those victories, with such sort of outpouring of warmth, really, towards all concerned, and they were a sort of fitting memory of Henry as well.
George, we'll go to have a look at a couple of the horses that Sam mentioned there. Morpheus, who very fittingly was the first winner trained by Lady Cecil, taking over from her late husband. This was at Nottingham, and fittingly enough, a half-brother to Frankel, out of kind, this being Morpheus. I think Songbird actually won a few minutes later over at Yarmouth, so it was a quick across-the-card double with the jockeys there all wearing black armbands, understandably. Just with Sir Henry Cecil, everyone's got their own memory and memories of him, and their own assessment of what a trainer he was. I think Steve Cawthon summed it up beautifully, because he rode for him, of course, with such distinction back in the 80s. He said he was just simply a genius. What did Sir Henry Cecil mean to you, George?
He was obviously a very popular guy. He had a great following, and when you look through his big race record, it was second to none, as Sam's alluded to. He's won everything. He was great at getting horses primed for the big day. And it's amazing, really, if you think back to 2005, he trained, I think, 12 winners, and it looked like his sort of career was coming to an end then, and he turned it around and came back and sort of painted his masterpiece with Frankel, really.
It was that, wasn't it? The fact that he had that lull, and George, no one will ever forget that incredible Oaks back in 2007, when Light Shift brought him back onto the classic stage, and you could only see in the shots afterwards the emotion that was in Sir Henry's face.
Yeah, I spoke to Ted Durkin quite a bit about it, and it was obviously a very emotional time for everyone. It sort of got himself back on the map. I think he'd won a Group 1 in France earlier in the year, but he just sort of turned the corner and got Warren Place back to where it belonged.
Sam, we'll move back to what you said about Royal Ascot as well. Sir Henry passing away the week before Royal Ascot, so Ascot was the tribute to him, a place where he sent out 75 winners. He absolutely loved the Royal Meeting, and of course Lady Cecil sending out Riposte to win the Ribblesdale. He was a brilliant trainer of fillies as well as any number of different types of horses. The emotion was palpable, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I mean, you could hear, actually, if you watch those races back, when sort of Riposte hits the front, the knowledge of the Ascot crowd, really, there seems even more of a sort of a heartfelt roar as Tom Queally hits the front, and that obviously meant an awful lot to people very close to Henry, not least Tom Queally, who had obviously been given a great chance there, and enjoyed a marvellous 2 or 3 seasons with Frankel and his progress. And it was an incredible afternoon in a lot of respects, really, and it just scenes that perhaps won't be repeated for a good while, because he was held in such reverence. And the fact that just a number of days after his death, the Juddmonte colours were carried to victory as well was a very fitting tribute to his life and to his career. And they were obviously a brilliant association over a number of years, Prince Carl and Henry, and it was great to at least see that victory did at least prove a fitting epitaph, really, to his career.
Sam, I'll stick with you before I get the thoughts of George, but one that you mentioned earlier was the Gold Cup at Royal Ascot, which was won by the Royal Horse. It was won by Estimate, who was already a Royal Ascot winner the year before. There must have been an incredible buzz. I wasn't there on the day, but an incredible buzz around the place just on that day. And we all remember the shots of Her Majesty the Queen watching on from the Royal Box, and the the adulation in her face to know that her horse had won the Gold Cup itself.
Yeah, I mean, it was an astonishing afternoon, really, because in a lot of respects it was a little bit of a, well, it was a bit of a fairy tale, to be honest. Obviously she was very well fancied for the race, estimate that is, not Her Majesty, and it just felt as if maybe the stars were going to be aligned and we were going to see something magical, and that's how it played out. And obviously Her Majesty's had a whole litany of winners up and down the country for a number of years, but obviously that was a first Grade 1 win for a while, or a first Group 1 win for a while, and to do it on such a big stage, I mean, and just the emotion on her face, whether you're a royalist or not, it was fabulous to see the sort of enthusiasm. And she has been a massive supporter and a passionate supporter of racing for any number of years now, and to see a little bit of reward for all her sort of efforts and enthusiasm that she's put into the industry over a number of decades was marvellous, really. There were great scenes of sort of unbridled joy, really, seeing her with a racing manager, and the sort of the emotions, the outpouring of the emotions when Estimate went over the line in front. It was a brilliant afternoon.
Yeah, George, how special was it at Royal Ascot, knowing the royal connection, obviously the royal meeting, but also the Queen's love of horse racing as well? How special was that day to you?
Well, it was obviously, people were expecting it to happen, and when the camera switched to the box just as she was coming up to the line, Estimate, the light on the Queen's face says it all. She gets a massive amount of enjoyment out of her racehorses. It's a real big passion in life, and you could see that on her face. And it was sort of, people were expecting it to happen, and she got the job done.
Right, we are going to introduce one of the stars of the flat season of 2013, Richard Hughes. And first up, ask the question: how many British Group 1s did Richard Hughes win in 2013? Sam, I'll fire it at you. You got the last one right. Will you get this one?
British Group 1s, I would say 4.
It was, what do you reckon, George? Sam's gone 4.
6.
It was 7. How many British Group 1s did Richard Hughes win in 2013? It was 7. It's a perfect opportunity to introduce him. Richard, thank you very much indeed for joining us. How are things?
Hi guys, how are you?
Not too bad at all. We're focusing here on the racing years of the year 2013, which for you personally was the second of 3 championships, 208 winners in the campaign in Britain, your most ever, 2 classics. How does that sound when you listen back to those facts and figures?
Oh, I'm very proud of it. The second championship was nearly better than the first because I wanted to prove it, if you know what I mean. I got a taste for it and I really wanted to prove I could do it again, And to ride the classic winner, it never really bothered me much, but I was quite surprised when I think my first one went by the line. The commentator said Richard Hughes' first classic.
So that wasn't necessarily something that had bothered you by that stage, but we're seeing Sky Lantern winning the Guineas at the beginning of May in 2013. She was a previous Group 1 winner. She'd won the Moyglare. She'd needed that run, hadn't she, in the Nell Gwyn, when behind Hot Snap. She was £3 better off as well. And then I suppose after that she proved what a different class she was in the Coronation as well.
Yeah, she was very good in the Coronation. I nearly put it down to one of my best rides. I think I was drawing 20 of 21. And I had 2 options. It was to either drop her out and hope that God it works out, or go forward, where it was going to be very difficult, and luckily it all worked out good.
How special was she?
I actually won the first time out, and Richard Young Jr. says to me, God, she's very good, isn't she? And yeah, she's not bad. She never done anything sparkling at home before it, and she was just very easy to ride. But she used to keep winning.
She did. There was a pretty extraordinary race with just a small field back in the July meeting of 2013 with Elusive Kate, and it was broadcast, the Stewards' Inquiries. We pick up the concluding stages of the race with Elusive Kate on the near side. You're obviously the grey Sky Lantern. You were carried over, and you argued that your filly was hit a couple of times with William Buick's whip aboard Elusive Kate, and the Stewards' Inquiry seems to take an absolute age to come through. It was obviously a very difficult afternoon, Richard.
Yeah, I couldn't believe we didn't get that in the Stewards' room. He brought me from one side of the track to the other, and hit her twice over the head. We appealed and no luck with the appeal. We were flabbergasted really that we didn't get it. I went into that stewards room that day I went past the line I'll get it inside in 5 minutes time, you know.
We're taking the concluded stages once again, and on that head on you'll see it was just a small field, but how obviously the first pass to the post, the winner Elusive Kate had wandered off to her left. Was it one of the most sort of flabbergasted moments you would have had on a racecourse to know that you, as we see the stewards' inquiry going on, yourself and William, that you went in there fully expecting to get it to come out, a bit dumbfounded?
Well, the rules are you're meant to run a straight line and not interfere with anyone. So he brought me from one side of the track to the other. William was doing all he could, don't get me wrong. His filly was hanging, but so do I take a pull and pull back to keep in a straight line, or do I keep going with my momentum forward and hope to God I could get by him? But it was every time I gained a stride, it seemed like I was going one backwards again.
Well, it was one rare low moment at that point, and she'd still been a fine enough second. What a brilliant filly she was. Now, you won the first classic, obviously, at the beginning of May, and then by the end of that month, you were winning the second. They were a bit like London buses in that respect, when Talent won the Oaks, making it a 1-2 for Rafe Beckett, because he had Secret Gesture as well. I was really interested to see what you'd said. You said that the pace was so strong at Epsom that day. You settled her out the back, and she obviously delivered in spades. Was it an early decision to sit out the back on her?
That was quite funny. Rafe sent me a message the night before, I'll see you at the start, and we'll walk the track at, I don't know, 12 o'clock or half 12. So I was a bit naughty. I let on I didn't get the message. I know my way around Epsom. And the plan, so I met Rafe at the scales, and he was a little bit annoyed, to be fair to him. I understand now why he was so annoyed. But we both made a plan that, because she was always a little bit numb, a bit free, so I said, right, well, I'll drop my hands, and going up that hill, the first 4 furlongs in Epsom, she won't pull if I just drop my hands, and I'll probably make the run it.
Yeah.
So that was the plan. If I make it, I make it, but I won't force her to make it. And I went 50 yards, and I was going as fast as I could, and I was at the back. They're going too quick. And I knew coming down Tottenham Corner I was going to win, you know. She came really live under me, and the pace started slacking, and there wasn't too many going better than me.
How special a day was that one?
Oh, it was brilliant. Talent was quite an outsider on the day, and I went and rode her work for Rafe. I think on was it been the Tuesday before or something like that?
Right.
And I think a horse rated 65 beat me on the gallop, couldn't get by it. And then in the meantime, Aidan O'Brien's rang to ride one that was quite fancied. I think it was 3rd or 4th in the betting. And it was one of those occasions where I said, no, I won't mess these people around now. I'll be loyal and I'll ride her, because I went and rode her work. And subsequently, Mark Dixon sent me a horse afterwards. So sometimes when you're being loyal, it does work out in your favour.
Yeah, just a bit. It's all worked out in the end. So 2 classics on the board. Now, one of the most sort of ongoing and sort of special storylines in ways was the battles between Dawn Approach and Toronado. There'd been the Guineas when Toronado hadn't run up to form, that epic clash in the St James's Palace. But then we came to what was effectively your happiest hunting ground in a way, at Glorious Goodwood, the Sussex Stakes of 2013. It was the next duel on the Downs. We'd had obviously the one that you were involved with, Camford Cliffs and Frankel. But you weren't to be denied this day, were you? How special a race was this, Toronado beating Dawn Approach?
Well, on the day, when I look back on this run, I actually think Dawn Approach ran a super race on the day. Like, they went very, very hard up front. And I was lucky enough, I said I'll have one go at him late, and I'll get him as late as I can. I felt I was very unlucky in Ascot. I went by him and I headed him, and we had a pretty severe bump halfway up the straight. And it knocked the stuffing out of him a little bit. So I just said, if I ever take Dawn Approach on again, I'll get him late and fast. So it worked out lovely. You
rode some brilliant milers. Obviously, I mentioned Camford Cliffs, etc. But in his own way, how much brilliance was there in Toronado, particularly as a 3-year-old? I know he came back and won a Sussex later in his career as well. Ran in a Sussex later in his career, but won a Queen Anne. How much brilliance was there as a 3-year-old for him?
Oh, he was a very, very good horse. Was he as good as Camford Cliffs? He probably wasn't as quick as Camford Cliffs, but he was a hell of a horse. There was a lot of good stallions in behind him. I think it was Gregorian and Rip Van Winkler in behind him in that race. you look back at what he beats, he's beaten a lot of good horses.
We've got George Baker on the line, of course, one of your former jockey rivals as well. And George, just with Richard Hughes, we're going to talk about a couple of the other wins at Goodwood. It almost became characteristic to watch Richard sitting out behind, delivering them perfectly on the line where it mattered at Goodwood, didn't it?
Yeah, he was very patient at Goodwood and he was prepared to let things happen and not rush horses. But Hughesy was brilliant from the front end at Goodwood as well. He's very effective around there, and I think it suited his style and his confident nature, and he kept horses nice and balanced, which is a key thing to do at Goodwood.
It was. Now let's talk about one of the 2-year-old stars that year, and that was Tourmore, who of course was a very, very good horse, and he won the Vintage Stakes. Another win for you and Richard Hannon in the Vintage Stakes itself. We'll pick it up, and you can see you in the colours of Midland Park Racing, just a couple behind you at this stage. Just talk us through this from your perspective. Was this sort of an archetypal Richard Hughes ride at Goodwood?
Personally, I always rode Goodwood, ride your horse first in the race afterwards, and especially a big backward 2-year-old. If you get them on their heads early, especially at Goodwood, you just don't finish. So you got to bite your lip between the 3 and the 2 to get them balanced before you actually get them rolling. I thought maybe Outstrip got away on me, but I still had to ride more, so I was either going to get there or I wasn't. But I felt I was doing the right thing. And I was lucky with Goodwood. I was very lucky at Goodwood, and people had great confidence in me riding. Oh, you ride Goodwood well. So if I didn't get up on him, I always felt that I wouldn't get the blame, you know.
At that sort of era, Richards, any time over the sort of 5, 6, 7 years before that as well, did you look forward to Glorious Goodwood like no other? Because very often we'd see superstar 2-year-olds emerging for the Hannon Yard and some of the older horses as well, some brilliant horses for the handicaps, and you seem to master that place so well. Did you look forward to Glorious Goodwood so much?
Oh, we did. Glorious Goodwood is a great place for nearly any owner in your yard can win. And you didn't need a champion to win at Goodwood. You know, you could win your maiden or your 0-95 handicap.
Yeah.
So we targeted, it wasn't a fluke, like Richard done a brilliant job. If we found a horse, you normally need a run at Goodwood, so if we found a good one at home, we'd give him a run somewhere maybe a furlong short of what he was able to do, and then he was teed up ready for Goodwood, you know.
There was any number of winners we could have gone through from that year, but we picked out as well in the Magnia Silks, Wentworth winning what was then the Betfred Mile, a huge pot to land as well. A huge handicap, and in truth, it never really looked that much of a danger. Landed quite a punt. It was a double-digit draw, no trouble it didn't seem, but I suppose he deserved it this day. Probably been a bit unlucky that season prior, hadn't he?
I didn't think he could get beat in the Hunt, or the Britannia, was it? Yeah, it was in the Britannia that year. I thought it was an absolute certainty, and it was my fault. After going a furlong, I just didn't think he was travelling, and the devil, he ended up dropping himself out too far. And in Goodwood that day, I got halfway up the hill and I was getting squeezed out. And I said, if I let him drop back out again, he'll just turn himself off. I'll never get him going again. So I just closed my eyes and I just went blind into a gap that wasn't really there. And I ended up getting a good position out of it. But I remember Balin saying to me when I came in, are you losing the plot? But I knew, I said, I'm not getting beaten this horse again. So it was either going to kill myself or win. There was no in between.
Did you love the challenge of a big handicap like that as well? Because we saw some of the smaller field 2-year-old races, we'll say 6, 7 runners, some of the straight mile races, some of the straight races, I should say, whether it be a big field. But when you are a hostage of fortune in ways, but how much could you make your own luck in a race like that where they come round the bend and it's a big field handicap?
I knew I was on one of the best horses, and if you're on a slow one or it's a little bit one pace around there, you've no chance. The one thing about Hannon's horses, they always travelled well. They were fresh and they were healthy, and you know, you had gears. But if you go to Goodwood on a slow horse, you're wasting. You go where you go. All the good positions are taken from the gate, and then you go where you're put. But luckily, Richards were always pretty good out of the gate and travelled well. So I invariably was able to get a good position first, and then if they were going too fast, I was able to slide back.
Really interesting to hear that.
Yeah, but slow or lazy horses find it very difficult at Goodwood.
We'll move on to the back end of the year, and it's Group 1s from here on in. And Champions Day, the QE2 was won by Olympic Glory. Was there a question as to whether it would have been Toronado or Olympic Glory, and was it swayed for Olympic Glory given that it was softer underfoot?
Definitely the ground.
Yeah.
All the ground related made our job easier, and we put blinkers on him as well. And he needed them, to be fair. He was definitely a better horse with them. Mm. You'd always hit a flat spot in a race, and at Group 1 level it's very hard to get away with hitting a flat spot. But on slower ground and blinkers on him, everything came to the fore with him that day.
Was everything coming to the fore for you that year? Because it was your second championship. You wouldn't get it, of course, it's changed now, but until November. But you had the statistics in terms of the numbers. You also had the classics. You were winning races like the QE2 as well. Was this the absolute peak, Richard, this sort of year?
Yeah, I was getting greedy. I was obsessive about the whole thing. I wanted to win every race. And I was very motivated at the time, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I was very driven like I hadn't been before in my career, if you know what I mean. That first championship really drove me forward, and I said, I can do this. And I believed in my own mind that I could win every race I went out in.
There were more Group 1s as well. The sadly ill-fated, we never saw the absolute best of her as an older horse, or even a 3-year-old, Crescelium, who was a huge price winner of the Fillies Mile, obviously at Newmarket. She then went on to Santa Anita and won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf as well. I think you said after that, it doesn't get any easier, that's for sure. How good was she?
I thought she was brilliant. And I kind of stumbled upon the ride. And the only reason I won on her that day was because I rode in Haydock her race before that, and she kicked by me probably a furlong and a half out, when nearly blew me over. She went by me that fast, and she pulled up about 50 yards from the line, and I got her back again.
Yeah.
So as soon as they rang me for the ride on the filly, I said, oh, this one does have a sneaky chance. She's a great turn of foot.
Interesting.
And probably had a better turn of foot than as any horse I ever rode.
Really? Even with some of the older horses that you rode with a real zest for a turn of foot?
She was very, very talented, and we went to America and won the Breeders' Cup Mile nearly on the bridle, you know.
Willie Carson, actually, we saw doing a bit of a jig. One of the part owners, he said that winning a Breeders' Cup, owning a Breeders' Cup winner is much easier than riding one. She gave you 2 great days at the end of that year. I just want to ask about how the landscape at Richard Hannon's changed that year, because of course the licence was switched over. But for Richard Hannon Senior, he signed off with the most amount of winners he'd ever sent out, 235 in the year 2013. Richard,
he was at his peak, and it just shows how good a man he was. At the top level, he handed it over to Richard. You know, that's a very hard thing to do, isn't it? But he sacrificed it and handed it over. But a brilliant man.
It was a brilliant trainer, and of course the reins handed over to Richard Jr. Just really quickly while we've got you, I know it's not specifically 2013, but Brentford Hope would when we eventually get racing back, would he be one of the horses you're most looking forward to, Richard?
I hope he is. It's just a terrible place to be in the way we are at the moment.
Yeah.
He hasn't gone fast this year. We believe he's a really nice horse, and we hope he can fulfil the potential that might be there. But at the end of the day, he's only won a maiden, you know. So
yeah.
Can't get too carried away.
5 lengths at Newmarket. I think, were you talking about, I know we won't get there because of course it was in April, but you'd speculated that he might go for the Derby trial at Epsom in late April. Obviously we won't have that meeting, but would be that the kind of race you'd have been looking at?
Yeah, either that race or the condition race in Newbury.
Okay, excellent
so,
stuff.
At the moment we don't know where we'll go, but he's in fine fettle and he's done really well over the winter.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing him as and when. Richard, thank you so much for reminiscing on 2013, the second of your 3 championships. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys. Stay safe.
Really nice to have the thoughts of Richard Hughes and his brilliant year in 2013, and Sam Turner, who's rejoined us just to look at some of those performances, but some of the rides that we saw at Goodwood. We came to associate Richard with that kind of late pounce, deliver exactly where it mattered.
Yeah, in some respects, obviously, you know, we're listening to George talk as well, and he was very much the same mould really as a jockey. Let events, you know, pan out in front of you, try and be the last off the bridle, and then just come and nick it late on, and just try and time your challenge to perfection. And both of those, you know, both jockeys were synonymous with that type of ride. Obviously they could both ride from the front as well, and they were good judges of pace. I think that was the key to both of them and the success that they enjoyed. And there was nothing better really than watching Richard on a horse that had got a good turn of foot, just settle out the back. He got beautiful hands, he was very patient. As I say, he'd let the race unfold in front of him. He'd just weave his way through, and if he was on a horse that was good enough, invariably he'd get there. He was a beautiful rider to watch for a tall guy, and somebody that probably really did have to watch his weight a lot. And George, in a lot of respects, they both had plenty of finesse about their riding as well. They weren't ungainly, they were tidy, compact, and if the horse was good enough, invariably they were. So yeah, I mean, Goodwood was a perfect track for Richard to sort of delay those or deliver those delaying tactics, really, where you can just appear late on the scene and they'll have got racing quick enough coming off that bend.
Now, Sam, we're going to move on to one of George's his finest moments, certainly of 2013. He was over 100 winners. Champions Day, we saw Olympic Glory winning the QE2, but there were other highlights to talk about. George, we'll come back to you, and I suppose frustration to kick off the day in the long distance race. Johnny Murtagh trains and rides at Royal Diamond to beat you on Harris Tweed, but you weren't to be denied much longer. Just talk to us about Harris Tweed and that race.
Well, Harris Tweed got on a roll, and I got a good association with him. He won a handicap at Glorious Goodwood, then went on to win the March Stakes, and went to Champions Day, the long distance cup, with every chance, not favourite, but had a decent chance. And I rolled along on the front end. He was very, very brave on very testing ground, and we fought off Eye of the Storm, Aidan O'Brien's horse. And I thought, we've done it, we're going to win, blah de blah. And Johnny Murtagh completely nutted me on the line on Royal Diamond, and I was absolutely devastated, because having a winner Champions Day is a big deal for anyone, but for me at the time I was just sort of break through. It had a bit of Group 2 success. I know the long distance cup is not a Group 1, I think it was a Group 3 at the time, but I was absolutely heartbroken, so it wasn't a good start to the day.
Yeah, it really was a case of here's Johnny at that point with his head down on the line, but you weren't to have to wait too long. Seal of approval, who'd had that horrible fall under Hayley Turner in the Park Hill at Doncaster. You were on this time, and it was the Group 1 champion fillies and mares. Just relive this moment for us, George.
She obviously loved the really testing ground, and I got on her by default, really. Hayley obviously had that bad fall in the Park Stakes, as you say. I'd won another time before the Park Stakes at Newbury in a listed race, and it all fell into line perfectly for her. She ended up not getting the clearest of runs up the straight, but I was patient, and when I switched out and got a bit of daylight, she quickened up, and she won very comfortably, beating Belle de Cressy of Johnny Murtagh's again, so I got my revenge on Johnny quite quickly.
Was that an ambition fulfilled?
To ride it, I only rode a handful of Group 1 winners through my career, and it was just a massive relief to do it. And to do it on the big stage like that, Champions Day was amazing, and it was a bit of a shock really, because I think she was a 20-1 shot going there. I thought she'd run well, may well nick a place the way you sort of ride her, and I didn't realise until you've won a Group 1 what a big deal it is, and people were very kind with thank you messages and so on, and it taken me a long time to do it, so it was a fantastic day. Luckily my wife was there and a few of my family, so it was brilliant. Really, really, I remember it very well.
Wonderful memories and worth the wait. Now, the Champion Stakes on the day, I'll just bring in Sam Turner, which was a tremendous race involving 3 class acts, Cirrus de Zegler, and also the Derby winner, Ruler of the World. It was a superb horse race, just to relive it again.
Yeah, some fantastic strength in depth as well, Nick, down the list as well, with Muckadram, Hillstar, Main Sequence, who went and won his next 4 in the US, and obviously Muckadram, the Eclipse winner from next year, and the 3 of them pulled, really nicely clear of Hunter's Light, who cut out the running, and Cirrus de Zegler's obviously, he doesn't need describing what he managed to achieve in his career, and the Derby winner on the outside. But Farr had been keen enough all the way around, really, tracking his pacemakers, Stablemate, Hunter's Light, but had enough in the tank to see off the 2 challenges of Cirrus de Zegler, who's obviously won a Champion Stakes at that stage, and Ruler of the World, who had got that confirmed 1.5 mile stamina as well. So it was no mean feat from Farr to go and win as he did.
No, I love Cirrus de Zegler as well. Just kept turning up for more and more And of course, the year before, he'd chased home Frankel in Frankel's final race as well. He just kept coming back for more on Champions Day. We're going to take a bit of a pause and take in some trivia as well. It's not to either George or Sam, this one. And this question is, we had the emergence of a 2-year-old star, and that was Kingman. Who rode Kingman to success on debut in June 2013? That was at Newmarket. And the answer is just around the corner.
As they run downhill, Adwa from See the Skies, Kingman though drawing alongside and meaning to quicken up quite nicely here. Then Citizen Kane, but it's Kingman who skipped a couple of lengths clear, racing out of the dip from Adwa, See the Skies, Citizen Kane. The rest are well beaten off, and Kingman is stretching away here under Ryan Moore. Boy, this is going to be an impressive debut. Kingman draws right away for a sparkling debut success.
And it was Ryan Moore on that brilliant Kingman. Of course, James Doyle would take the ride thereafter, and there is Ryan coming back in on the July course back in 2013, and what a superstar Kingman went on to become. We're going to finish with some viewer requests, but for now, thank you very much indeed, George Baker. Have you enjoyed going back to the year 2013?
Yeah, it's been good fun. It was a great year for myself, and it was good to look back. I've really enjoyed these sort of look back on the years on the racing TV. It's been really, really enjoyable.
George, thank you. Keep safe. And Sam Turner as well, who's been there for the duration. We've had Ruby and AP, Ryan Mania, Richard Hughes, George Baker coming on, loads of variety. And it's refreshed the memory suitably, hasn't it?
Something needed to, Nick. It was a bit of a reboot, certainly. But yeah, it's fascinating going through the 12 months and seeing a number of these big stories that sort of lit up the racing scene all the way from January right through to Treb's victory, perhaps in the Arc as well, which was a scintillating performance. So yeah, very enjoyable afternoon. Thank you.
Sam, thank you. Keep safe and well, and we will speak soon. We are going to finish the show with some of your requests. And Richard Farquhar, who got in contact with me over Twitter, he would love to see Treaty of Paris winning the Acomb Stakes at York's Ebor meeting.
They're approaching the halfway point. Treaty of Paris striding out in front just from the Grey Gatsby on the inside, with Il Paparazzi poised on the near side, the red cap, followed by Lady Lara, Brazos, and on the right as we look at them picking up ground quite nicely now is First Flight for Silvestre de Souza, and now they're really stretching out for home then, passing the 2 furlong pole. Here they come. Treaty of Paris still the leader. Il Paparazzi trying to tackle him on the outside. The Grey Gatsby's hit a flat spot that's coming under pressure. On the inside then is First Flight. They're racing up inside the final furlong here. This could be an upset. Treaty of Paris and James Doyle. Il Paparazzi on the near side for Neil Callan, and now the Grey Gatsby really picking up, but it's Treaty of Paris in no mood to be denied, all out and hangs on and wins the Acomb.
That was Treaty of Paris winning the Acomb in August 2013. We'll go up to December of that year, Tingle Creek Day, big handicap hurdle. And it was a race won by Deep Trouble. This has come in from an anonymous email, but thank you for getting in touch. Leighton Aspel, his recovery aboard Deep Trouble for Ben Case.
There's still about 8 or 9 with a chance here. Urbane de Civila, Deep Trouble bursting through. Ruacana towards the near side. Over on the far side, Calculated Risk, and then a flat-footed River Meg as they come down towards the final flight. It is Deep Trouble. Jinx almost unseats the rider and runs off the track towards the near side. Urbane de Civila. They've got 100 yards to go. The rider of Deep Trouble has lost his irons, but he still has the lead. Now River Meg trying to lift it out of the fire. Urbane de Civila racing to the line. Deep Trouble, a remarkable win.
Yeah, there we are in slow motion from the head on. You'll see how much the horse went out to his right and the rider losing both irons. Leighton Aspel, who of course has just called time on his career. But a big Saturday, valuable handicap on Tingle Creek Day at Sandown, and that was an anonymous email coming in. I think we've got time for just one more, and it's that glorious perennial, Gordon Lord Byron winning the Sprint Cup at Haydock.
Hoof it down the middle, a pink jacket just shading it from Hamza. Soul away to the left with Slade Power. Here Art and Gordon Lord Byron on the right. Lethal Force driven to try and get on terms. Now they quicken down inside the 2, and Gordon Lord Byron has moved through on the far side to take over there. Slade Power challenging down the near side from Hoof it and Soul. Hamza's a couple of lengths off them. Gordon Lord Byron running that solo up the far rail, passing the furlong. Slade Power is giving chase. Then Soul and Hoof it, Hamza and Hawkeye the New, but it's Gordon Lord Byron in front, runner-up in the race 12 months ago. He reigns supreme this time, and Gordon Lord Byron wins the Betfair Sprint Cup.
The globe-trotting Gordon Lord Byron winning the Haydock Sprint Cup under Johnny Mercer back in 2013. A couple of your viewer requests to come in as we looked back on the racing year of 2013 and some great contributions all the way through. Thank you to them, and thank you at home for watching. Keep safe, and we'll see you again on the Racing Years.